Tree of Life Messianic Congregation in Katy, Texas. And tonight we will be looking at Ezekiel chapter 6 and 7. Let's begin with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, now when we jump into this first one, and of course here's our ubiquitous maps and so forth that if you're new you can see them now. Okay, let's look at the first part of this. The word of Adonai came to me saying, Son of man, set your face toward the mountains of Israel and prophesy to them. Say, mountains of Israel, hear the word of Adonai. Thus says Adonai Elohim concerning the mountains and concerning the hills, concerning the wadis and concerning the valleys. Behold, I will bring a sword on you. I will destroy your high places. Okay, now, Ezekiel is not a book that brings a whole lot of joy and gladness, as we can tell that just from all of that. Verse 1 here, the word of Adonai came to me saying. Now what that is, it's a beginning. It's a new segment for this prophecy, and so when it says now set your face or turn your face, that is like, okay, you're turning to face something and it's like in battle. You're facing the enemy. You're setting your face against it and you put on your war face. And so that's kind of what it's saying there. And the mountains particularly are spelled out because that was where they had a lot of what they called high places. And these were places of worship, not to God. These were places of worship to some of these little g gods that were in Canaan, the pagan gods, Baal and Ashtoreth and so forth. So then the wadis and the valleys were also important because they used those for, that seemed to be the place where Baal worship was. Okay, and we saw that those were people from Moab, and they did their worshiping on the plains out there and in the valleys or in the wadis, but not so much on top of the mountains. The Canaanites, they liked their mountains. And so the sword here refers to Babylon coming in and destroying Jerusalem. So when he speaks of high places, that could mean just about any kind of worship, because this high place, the Hebrew word is bamar, okay, and it's beit, a mem, and a resh, and so it really means it could really mean that it's an elevated place, something that's in an elevated geologically, up on a mountain or a hill or something, but it came to mean any kind of worship place that stood out from its surrounding background. So we could see that. Let's look on a couple of places I saw over there. These are some stela. These little columns, or they're really not very big. Some of them be 3 or 4 or 5 feet tall. That's all. And these were at Hatzor. And so then over here, there's a stela that's at a gate at Tel Gesher. Now, Tel Gesher is just right across the Jordan into the Jordan territory. And this is right at the front gate of the old city. And so that was also called a high place. Now, in Tel Dan, this was called a high place, and actually, I guess you could say it's on a high place, because if you walk, okay, I hope you can see my hand here. If you walk up these steps, this is where they had the temple after the kingdom was split. After Solomon, well, then they came, half of the Israel, the northern 10 tribes came up and they worshiped up here. They had a temple in Dan, and so their temple was right here. Here's the steps to it. And what they've done here is to put a metal, just a framework to kind of show you the size and shape of what the altar would have been. They made an alternative altar up there in Tel Dan, because Rehoboam and Jeroboam, I could never remember which one was the northern guy, but the one that split off, he didn't want the 10 tribes from the north going to Jerusalem to worship. So he built all of this up there, and they called that a high place. A stela, yeah, it was asked, what is a stela? It's just a pillar of stone that was laid out. It represented one of the pagan gods. That's what that is. It's just a pillar that was erected, and they would, they'd throw down little sacrifices at it, or at the foot of it, or they'd burn things to it. It was a representation of their god. So that's, okay. Your altars will become desolate. Your altars will become desolate. Your sun pillars will be broken. I will cast down your slain men before your idols. I will lay the corpses of Bnei Israel before their idols. I will scatter your bones around your altars. In all your cities, the cities will be desolate. The high places will be deserted. Your altars will be laid waste and made desolate. Your idols broken and destroyed. Your sun pillars cut down and your works blotted out. The slain will fall in your midst. Then you will know that I am Adonai. All right. Now, in this, we know that the coming army that came through, the Babylonians, they came through and pretty much laid waste to everything. They destroyed just about everything in their path. It was truly a scorched earth policy when they came through. Why? Because Israel, or the Judah, actually, Jerusalem, had said they were going to behave themselves and not cause trouble, and then they rebelled up against Nebuchadnezzar, and actually had allied themselves with the Egyptians. And so when Nebuchadnezzar came back, he was not in a good mood. So just everything was destroyed. So, and that's what this prophecy is talking about. Now, God would destroy the altars and the people who worshiped around them. They would be certainly slain. The idols, and here, these idols would not be able to defend their worshipers. And so the Lord would defile all of these idols with the bones of the Israelites that had died before them. Here they were worshiping, maybe crying out to these idols, and the Babylonians came through and just killed them. And of course, the idols are not going to be able to save the Israelites or anyone else. And so, generally speaking, if you had these types of altars anywhere around Israel, you would find scattered animal bones, because they would have sacrifices, and rather than how they had it in Jerusalem, where there was specifically what you did with the different bones and so forth. You took them outside the city, you buried them, or you got rid of them. Well, these high places, they'd make their sacrifices, and then they'd just throw the bones away and start a new sacrifice. So there would be bones littering all around these high places, but that was just common and no big deal. But for Israel and many of the others to have human bones scattered all around these high places, that was desecration to that high place. And so what God is saying is that, okay, I'm going to have all of these people killed and not buried, and they will just stay there, and you will find bones, human bones, all around these high places, and basically making them so polluted that they can't come back in later on and have a high place or a worship place for the pagan gods. So that was another aspect of the judgment. And so here we have a statement, and I'm going to say it later on in the slide also. What's the result of this? What is God trying to say? He's saying that I'm doing all of this because then you will know that I am Adonai. I am the Lord. This whole, I'd quoted some guy that he said, judgment is a pervasive theme in all of the prophets of Israel, but none of them exceeded Ezekiel in their abundance of judgment and the intensity of the messages of divine retribution. None of them reiterates the things like Ezekiel did. He was, he would say something, then he would say it 2 or 3 more times over and over and over again. And so the result, or the desired result, was that these people would know that God is on the throne and he is not happy with them, that he's bringing the one. He is the one that's bringing judgment on them for their sins and for their apostasy. And so, and later on, we'll see, of course, there's redemption. But right now, this is the judgment phase. Now, the clause, and I think that you know that you will know that I am the Lord, occurs about 65 times, I believe, in Ezekiel, and he's talking about, especially when they're talking about some of the other foreign nations, in chapters 25 to 32. And so, okay, now here is a sun pillar at Tel Gezer over there in just across the Jordan, in the country of Jordan. Okay. All right. So going on with verse 8. Yet I will leave a remnant, some that escape the sword among the nations. When you have been scattered through the countries, your survivors will remember me among the nations where they are carried captive. How I was crushed by their adulterous heart that was strayed from me, and their eyes which have lusted after their idols. They will loathe themselves in their own sight for the evils that they have committed in all their abominations. They will know that I am Adonai. I have not warned in vain that I would do this evil to them. Now, God always leaves a remnant. He has always had a remnant of his people. He never did totally destroy his people anywhere. He always had some that he set aside. Even destroying the world, he set aside the remnant, Noah and his family. Now, the remnant was scattered. I mean, they were everywhere. They went all throughout Babylon and Assyria. A bunch of them ended up in Egypt, but they still existed and they still retained their culture. So all of these survivors or the remnant would remember how far away that they strayed from the Lord, and they will be sorry for it. It will cause great sorrow for them, great regret. And at the end of the day, the remnant will remember back, and they will know that it was God that caused all of this turmoil and chaos and judgment to happen to them, but it was because of their sin. The Bible was very clear in Torah that if you obey God and do all the things that he says to do, you would be blessed. But if you did not, you would be cursed. And the curses were spelled out. If you look in Deuteronomy, you would see that there's like 3 times more space devoted to the curses than there were to the blessings. and God just spelled it out, and he meted out judgment just according to his word. It was right there in the contract. And so he says that the remnant will remember this. And you remember what I told you about the remnant, that the people that were in Babylon, that would be the remnant, okay? And how that Judaism actually came out stronger as a result of the exile than they were before the exile. Why? Because they set up the synagogue system with a local teaching and local court system and everything, so that the people, once they got back into Israel, they would not have to wait for some kind of a question from the rabbis until they got to Jerusalem. They could ask their local rabbi who was sitting there in their town, and they had the courts to adjudicate for them. And then they also set up the houses of prayer, the synagogue, on a local basis, and basically made it the weekly place for Jews to come together, and that made them a stronger people. So the remnant was saved, and they came back stronger. Verse 11 says, "Thus says Adonai Elohim, clap your hands, stamp your feet, and cry, alas, because of all of the abominations of the house of Israel, who will fall by the sword, by famine, and by plague. The one who is far off will die of the plague. The one who is near will fall by the sword. Whoever remains and is spared will die by the famine. This is how I will spend my fury on them. You will know that I am Adonai." Now, clapping hands and stomping your feet. Of course, clapping your hands in today's world, that is applause. It's not really associated with grief, but back in those days, and still in some parts of the world, you can. And I've seen people in the Middle East, when something happens to them, that they'll sometimes they'll be slapping their heads, but I mean they're clapping their hands and then they'll stomp their feet. It's kind of almost like they're throwing a fit in some ways. They're just trying to express, it's one of those grrr things that they're trying to express their grief, and that was a well-known way of expressing grief during this time frame. So the prophecy just repeats itself, that those that are far away will die by the plague. Those who are near die by the sword, and everyone who's around, and then the others are going to die by the famine. So almost everybody dies except that small remnant that God decides to save. And he says again, why does he do this? So that they will know that he is the Lord. It's not to be trifled with. Okay. And so going ahead, when your slain lie among your idols, surrounding their altars, on every high hill, on all the mountaintops, under every green tree, under every leafy oak, the places where they offer sweet aroma to all their idols. And so he's just a continuation of the judgment prophecies. And so what I talked about, where your slain will lie among the idols. And so this is contrasted. Now, remember when God would tell the Israelites that they were to sacrifice these animals on the altar of in Jerusalem, and when they did that and burned up the offering, it said that it was a sweet smelling savor to the Lord when they would put these animals on the altar, and it burned them up, and the smoke went up, and he said it was a sweet smelling savor to their sweet aroma to God. And so now here he is kind of contrasting these. yeah, he says these rotting corpses, that's the sweet smelling aroma to these little g gods. And in fact, it's kind of funny, you don't really catch it in the English translations, but when Ezekiel is talking about these high places and these stellas, or these pillars, the sun pillars and all that kind of stuff, he uses some words, and especially these high places. In some cases, he uses words like dung heap or something. He somehow associates these monuments to the pagan gods to excrement. Okay, and I'll just leave it at that. We don't have to get too nasty or graphic with it, but he kind of coined a phrase of that these were just well, in today's world it would be equivalent to saying they were a s-hole. Okay, or you know what I'm trying to say. When we describe certain countries or certain practices, it just you use excrement as an adjective, or I guess that's what it would be, an adjective, or to describe it, whatever that is. All right. And so that's what Ezekiel did quite often, very, very often, in fact. And so, okay, and I goofed up here. It says 38 times. It's about 65 times in Ezekiel that he uses the phrase of Adonai, and you will know that I'm Adonai. So I will stretch out my hand over them and make the land desolate and waste, more than the wilderness of Diblah, where they live, wherever they live. Then they will know that I am Adonai. All right, now this again, we're going back. It means that there is not going to be a safe haven anywhere in the land of Israel and in Judah and the surrounding areas. And he says that he will stretch out his hand, and it'll all be desolate, all be wasteland, and even more than that desolate wasteland of Diblah, wherever they live. Okay, well, where is Diblah? Now, what they may be talking about is Riblah, and when they translated or when they wrote this down, because if you note that the Diblah starts with a dalet. Here is the dalet, okay? And Riblah starts with a resh, and here's the resh. They look kind of like, if you're not really careful, if you don't write very carefully in the block letters, they will look the same, and it can really mess you up unless you know the word to begin with, and you can understand it. But anyway, that's what they were talking about there, is that nowhere in Israel would it be safe from God's judgment. With chapter 7, the word of Adonai came to me, saying, you son of man, thus says Adonai Elohim, concerning the land of Israel, the end has come on the four corners of the land. The end is upon you. I will send my anger on you. I will judge you according to your ways. I will bring all your abominations on you. My eyes will not spare you, nor will I have pity, but I will bring your ways upon you for your abominations in your midst. Then you will know I am Adonai. Now, this is first alarm. Okay, there's the segment of 3 alarms here. This is the first one. We've kind of jumped into another section here, because what did it say? The word of Adonai came to me, saying. You look at chapter 6, it says the word of Adonai came to me, saying. So here's the new section, a little bit different pathway. God announced that he was bringing an end on the whole land of Israel, and that it was coming soon. Now, this judgment would become because the Lord was angry with his people for all of their abominable sins. Now, you remember, he had sent them into Canaan to get rid of the Canaanites because of their abominable sins. And so they were the agents of justice and to stop the corrupt practices of the Canaanites. But what happened? Israel took up those vile practices of the Canaanites. And so why would he then spare them? And so it says that he would not restrain his punishment, but would bring the consequences of their sins on them. When you sin, you have consequences. When you don't sin, there are consequences. It's just what consequences do you want? They could, and they would go, it says that they would go into a land where the abominations that they had lusted after would make them sick. And they would know that Adonai was the true God. And so these words, is almost identical words that we'll see repeated over and over again, just emphasize the seriousness with which God looked at these people and how the judgment was coming. And so the fact that this message of judgment needed to be repeated so many times can only be understood against there's a popular belief back then of the total invincibility and viability of Jerusalem. They said, we're a great city, we just cannot be beaten. And so he had kept repeating it over. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And but Israel said, it can't happen to Jerusalem. We're just too strong. And they had been in siege before, under Hezekiah and prior kings, and they had not been overrun. But that was because God was standing on their side. And as long as God was God and God's temple and God's city, that could stand in their mind, that they could just not be defeated. And so at this point, then the Lord is just telling them, no, it's not. It's going to be different this time, and you are going to be judged as a consequence of your own actions. You're going to be judged according to your actions. And so that was at this point, then God is the agent, or he's making the Babylonians the agent of his judgment on the people based strictly on their own sins that caused this. Verse 5, thus says Adonai Elohim, an evil, a singular evil, behold, it comes. An end has come. The end has come. It has awakened against you. Look, it is coming. Doom has come upon you, inhabitant of the land. The time has come, the day is near. Panic, not joyful shouting on the hills. Now, soon I am about to pour out my fury on you. I will exhaust my anger on you. I will judge you according to your ways. I will bring all your abominations on you. My eye will not spare you, nor will I have pity. I will repay you for your ways. Your abominations are in your midst. Then you will know that it is I, Adonai, who strikes. All right. So he's revealing that there's just going to be a unique disaster coming on them, a different kind of evil, a different kind of disaster that they haven't had before. And of course, that's conquest. They've never been totally beaten like is going to be coming again this time. And it would be the end of Israel as they knew it at that point. And it was near. And so said that this was going to be such a devastating attack that it would go throughout the mountains, and it was not going to be a joyful sound. And the joy of the Lord was just about to judge his people for all their abominations, and he would show absolutely no pity. He said, I've had it with you, and you're going to get what's coming to you. And so that they would know that he is Lord. Now, this part of the scripture, it stresses the horror and the surprise of the coming judgment, as well as the person judging. Now, this last phrase, it's a new phrase that we haven't heard before. It's, the Yod He Vav He, the Adonai, the Lord who strikes. It's the Lord, Adonai Makeh, and that's that word in Hebrew is one who strikes, but it's a slaughterer, one who just goes in and slaughters everything. And so that's a horrible concept to be thinking of God in those kinds of terms. So we're used to hearing all these words, and I'll say them in the translations that we've become used to hearing. Jehovah Jireh, even though there's no such word as Jehovah, you can't pronounce it because there's no J sound in Hebrew. So, and then Jehovah Nissi, and those were words of comfort and support and so forth. But now he's got one. This is the Lord who strikes, Adonai who slaughters. And so he had provided for them and protected them. Now he was about to strike them down. There was a saying that I think this was Matthew Henry says, to those shall have just judgment without mercy, who made light of mercy when it was offered them. And so he's just saying, well, you're having judgment now without any mercy at all, because you did not take advantage of that mercy when it was offered. You just turned your back on God and you worshiped the little g gods of Canaan. And in verse 10, he says, behold, the day, look, it is coming, doom has gone out, the rod has budded, arrogance has blossomed, violence grows into a rod of wickedness. Nothing will come from them, nothing from their crowd, nothing from their tumult, nothing distinctive among them. The time has come, the day draws near. The buyer will not rejoice, the seller will not play the mourner, for wrath is on the entire crowd. For a seller will not regain what he has sold as long as they are alive. For the vision against her whole crowd will not be revoked. No one will preserve his life because of his iniquity. The Lord has announced that the judgment of Israel, their doom is coming, and it's coming right now. Right now. He's waited a long time. Judgment was about to, says, break forth as buds on a branch. That's one of the exciting things about springtime, is to see these little buds start breaking out in the orchards, on the trees, and blueberry plants and so forth. You see these little things that start to swell, and then they just bloom out. And so that's beautiful when it's a plant. Not so beautiful when it's judgment. And that's the same kind of thing. It starts out small and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you have a full-blown flower of judgment. And the people's violence had grown from a small shoot into a stout branch of wickedness. They started out small, just little sins, but then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. Nebuchadnezzar would prove he would be the one that would be the rod in God's judgment. And so there is not going to be any Superman, no eminent individuals. There's not going to be a Samson or a Gideon or anything like that, and that's going to come in and rescue. And it says that nothing there's no material things would just be valueless. The time of judgment was so near that basically basic commerce would just fall, because people, they didn't have money, or they'd spent all their money, and even if they did have money, there was nothing to buy because all of the food was gone. So the buyer who normally rejoiced over a good business deal, because I got a good deal on this, would not be happy because he wouldn't be able to possess the land that he may have purchased. And anyone who was forced to sell his land because he's destitute, he's broke, and all he had left is land, that he's going to grieve because now he's lost it anyway. So it just was one of those things that there would be no commerce, and there would be no redemption of the land or anything like that due to the Shemitah year, every 7 years, or the Jubilee. And so that is gone. Remember that the Israelites had not ever practiced a proper Shemitah or the Jubilee year, the 7 year and the 50 year. They had never done that. They had never returned the original lands back to their people, the original clans. And so that's why God said, okay, you're going to be in captivity for 70 years, because it's been a cycle of 490 years that you have not had a Shemitah, and you never have let the land rest. Now I'm going to let it rest for 70 years. So that's where he's going with this. And so there, in this portion of scripture, there might be maybe a couple of oracles in here. The first two verses, they stress the imminence, the comprehensiveness, and the readiness of judgment. It's right there. And then the last couple of verses there says, it talks about the permanence and the suddenness of it, that it's just going to be devastating. So a lot of times, the Israelites they seem to forget about any of those curses that come from disobeying God. But now these messages of judgment are here, and they're constantly then being reinforced. In verse 14 says, they have blown the horn, they have made everyone ready, yet no one goes to the battle. Surely my wrath is on her whole crowd. Outside is the sword, inside plague and famine. Whoever is in the field will die by the sword. Whoever is in the city will be devoured by famine and plague. Those survivors who escape will head for the mountains like doves of the valleys, all of them moaning, each one over his iniquity. All hands will be feeble, all knees will turn to water. They will also gird on sackcloth. They will put on sackcloth. Horror will cover them. Shame will be upon their faces. Baldness will be upon all their heads. All right. So Jerusalem had made all the preparations. They'd gathered their men for war. They got their weapons together. They sharpened their swords. They got their shields ready to go and their armor. And it was all to no effect, because it was just not going to work. The reason for that was, in this occasion, the Lord was not going to be fighting for Israel. He was going to be fighting for Nebuchadnezzar. He was on the side of Nebuchadnezzar, strengthening him against Israel. And so the morale of the people inside Jerusalem would be so bad that they couldn't even fight. I mean, they just couldn't bring up the will to fight. Not even the best rah-rah speech out there to spur the men into battle. It won't work, because they just do. We're going to be beaten anyway. We're going to die anyway. And so what's the use? So this whole idea of the the triple judgment, the sword, the famine, and the plague, they're repeated again and again. And so even those who are able to escape from Jerusalem, they will know that they've been defeated, and it's just total devastation out there. Everywhere it's going to be bad. There will be no morale left. And they said that they'll put on sackcloth. Well, sackcloth, what is that? That refers to putting on something made of camel's hair. And people, remember, a lot of times people would wear sackcloth to show their grief or their mourning or something over, say, a person, one of their relatives had died or something like that. But now they're showing that they will be wearing that and showing their grief. So they're just, going from bad to worse, I guess, from the clothes that they had. So one of the, setup here says all knees will turn to water. Well, one commentator said that reference to the knees is actually something that makes that their knees will run with water, meaning that they were so afraid that they no longer had bladder control. They wet themselves, they peed their pants because they were so scared. And so, yeah, I know it's gross, okay, but that's what one of the commentators, how he looked at that, and it could make sense that these people would just, they would just lose it all. Verse 9. Oh, and I forgot to roll that out there. Verse 19. They will throw their silver in the streets. Their gold will be as garbage. Their silver and their gold cannot deliver them in the day of Adonai's wrath. They will not satisfy their appetite nor fill their bellies, for their iniquity is a stumbling block. They took pride in their beautiful jewelry and made images of their abominations and their detestable idols. Therefore, I made it nidah to them. I will give it into the hands of the strangers as plunder, and to the wicked of the earth as spoil. They will profane it. I will turn my face from them, as they will profane the place I treasure. Robbers will enter it and profane it. All right. So what they're saying here is that valuables and food, well, there would be no food. Valuables would mean very little, because, what good is it? All of the people are wanting to do is to remain alive. Their money can't buy any food. Why? Because there's no food there. We've already heard where it says that they will actually even turn to cannibalism. The people have become proud and arrogant over their glorious Jerusalem with its golden temple. And you remember that this temple was covered, it was overlaid in gold. And so when the sun would come up in the morning over the mountains and hit that edifice, that gold, all of that gold, it was brilliant. It just would blind the eye. And so they'd gotten to the point where, they just looked at it and, oh, they were so proud and puffed up that, is there anything else like this in all the world? And so they had actually, in some of their arrogance and so forth, they had actually taken some of the furnishings of the temple, say cups, plates, stuff like that, and melted them down and made idols out of them. And so, they had pretty much desecrated God's temple. And so he was going to make the temple an abhorrent thing to them. And then he's just going to turn it over to the enemy because, hey, the temple has already been destroyed, had been defiled. I don't care anymore about it because it's just so defiled. Just might as well have the enemy, let the enemy have it. The language that he used, it would be a nidah to them. Well, you know what a nidah is? That's the woman's period or monthly period. And during that time, she was unclean. And so it was one of those deals where, it was not, you were not to have relations with a woman who was in that period of the month. And it was just a time of that. It was another one of those gross things to say that all of their riches were no more valuable now than the discharge of a woman in menstruation. So please pardon me for the graphic descriptions of that, but that is the extent of what God was turning that into to them, that it would be just so abhorrent to them, what they would see of the temple. And of course, what happened to the temple? It was okay. It wasn't totally destroyed like the Romans did it, but it was pretty well beat up. So It said, the Lord forged the chain, for the land is full of bloodshed. The city is full of violence. I will bring the wicked of the nations, and they will possess their houses. So I will end the pride of the strong when their holy places are profaned. Shuddering comes. They will seek peace, but there will be none. Disaster upon disaster will come, and rumor upon rumor. They will seek a vision from a prophet, but Torah will perish from the Kohen, and counsel from the elders. The king will mourn, the priest will be clothed with despair. The hands of the people of the land will tremble. By their conduct, I will deal with them, but by their own standards, I will judge them. Then they will know that I am Adonai. All right, so it says, change. What did change mean? Well, change. That means, okay, it's time now. Here's, if you were talking about a criminal, you catch the criminal, and what do? You put handcuffs on him. You chain him up. And so this forged the chain. This tells us that prophecy time now is ended. And so now it is judgment time. And so he's, chains are associated with bondage and defeat and slavery. And so he's saying, okay, break out the chains, make up the chains, because now it is time. And to carry off, time to carry off the people of Judah and Jerusalem into exile. And so some commentators actually say that they thought that Ezekiel was to make a literal chain as another symbolic act. We don't know, but he said he would bring the worst nation. Well, what's the worst nation? The bad guys of the world, the Babylonians, against his people, and they would take over the homes of the people of Judah. So the pride of the powerful Judahites, the strong ones, the pride of the strong ones would end, and their enemies would actually profane the high places, all of their high places. And of course, these high places were not places of worship for the Lord. They were high places for pagan worship. And they would not be able to escape any of this. It would all be lost. And there's not going to be any saving prophet that comes along with good news and a prophecy of redemption and salvation and so forth. He says, ain't happening this time. That the Kohens are not, the priests are not going to be able to come up with anything out of Torah that would give the people hope. Nothing is left. All is lost. They can just forget it. And he's going to punish them in direct relationship to the amount of their apostasy, their idolatry, their turning away from God. And it's the same kind of an idea of whatever you reap, that's what you're going to sow. You reap bad seed, you're going to reap either bad plants or no plants, because the seed is bad. And so generally speaking, why do we wear clothes? Okay, so we won't be embarrassed. Well, now instead of the clothes, he said instead of being clothed with clothes, they'll be clothed with shame. And so that just basically everything around them, they're going to be identified and looked upon and looked at themselves with shame. So this is a very frightening chapter. It consists of a group of poetic articles. It's supposed to convince Ezekiel's fellow hostages there in Babylon that their hopes of returning soon to their homes and families in far off Judah was just not going to happen. And this judgment was coming. It was real. It was permanent. And so nothing no way, shape, or form could they escape this coming judgment. All right, that completes chapter 7, and then we'll go on next time we meet.